Resident Evil has a long history, way too much to be thorough in this review. In fact, when you think about the Resident Evil franchise, it's a shock to think that it's 19 years old now. Created originally for the PlayStation 1, the original game set the bar and pretty much created the survival horror genre in gaming.
Watch out! It's a monster!
Let me take care of this.
It spun off into a multi-million dollar movie hexology thanks to the new movie coming out next year.
What is going on here?
And the original game has received many remakes, a HD one as recently as this year for Xbox, PC and PlayStation systems.
The show must go on.
It comes as no big surprise that Capcom, a company founded in 1979, is going to keep whipping franchises that work for it. Over the years, they have developed into a large company, employing over 2,000 people, and have headquarters in Japan and the USA. Resident Evil 2 Revelations is the sequel to Resident Evil Revelations, a game that was originally designed exclusively on the handheld system, the Nintendo 3DS. The team believed that its 3D capabilities could provide the feeling of danger lurking behind every corner. Working with the MT Framework engine, a portable version, and having developers that recently designed another portable iteration of Resident Evil Mercenaries for the system, they were able to create console-level graphics and received high acclaim when it was released in 2012.
Picture quality you could only enjoy on a home console until recently.
A year later in January, it was released on Xbox 360, PlayStation 3 and Wii U. What made the title different is that it created tension by making zombies have horrible sounds before encounters, allowed the character to move and shoot, a first for the series. It also allowed for upgrades to be attached to guns, and unlike the direction of Resident Evil 5 and 6, which have taken a much more action-orientated approach, perhaps to appeal to the mainstream, Revelations took the game back to its roots for more survival horror. It's set between Resident Evil 4 and 5. Resident Evil Revelations 2 starts off with a bit of a convoluted intro. If you've finished Revelations and have played all of the previous games in the series, I feel like that this still might leave you a bit confused. The mythology for the series is massive, but regardless, it has a plot of its own. Within minutes, you are, like a lot of survival horror games, isolated and cut off from the world. You are trapped on an island that seems to be some sort of horrible biohazard experiment, not really an original. Your two main characters are Barry Burton, who's an old-time favourite, and Claire Redfield, who's also a seasoned virus enthusiast. Claire is there by force, Barry is there by choice. As this is an episodic game, you can buy it in episodes. Each episode lasts about 2 to 3 hours, depending on difficulty. The first half is Claire and the second half is Barry. That's for every single episode. Like a lot of the Resident Evil games, it has you pinned against undead people, but as a series, this has to have changed because there have just been so many games. So that's why your average foe will have barbed wire or an extra arm, with the obvious and not so obvious weak spots. It all really depends on the strain of virus, of which now there are so many. Ouroboros, the T-virus and the Abyss virus, they all seem to be viruses common to the Revelations story arc. Spikiness seems to be a common factor, and some creepy tentacles. Generally, the game did bring on the scares. Some of the creatures are pretty strange, not so much the bosses, but the standard enemies you encounter during the level. At the end of each chapter, I was able to level up abilities, such as my ability to dodge, melee, heal myself faster, and so forth. Some were a bit cheap in the way that options are simply enabling your AI-controlled partner to actually shoot, and or follow up with a melee attack. Which brings me to the point that you have a partner in every circumstance in Revelations 2. Allowing you to switch between characters is handy. You can swap items to each other seemingly regardless of range, unlike the previous Resident Evil games that shared the two-character feature, like Resident Evil 0 for example on the GameCube. Certain characters have certain abilities. Claire's companion, Moira, Barry B's daughter, doesn't use guns, which is an intriguing story element. It's somewhat frustrating though as a game mechanic. You can use her to blind enemies, which can set Claire up for a shot, but often enemies don't seem to be that affected, and it's not really explained why her torch can affect them, but the sun cannot.
That almost sucked.
Barry's partner is a mysterious girl, definitely my favourite character in the game, bar Barry. An appreciated part of the story is that she is somehow superhuman. She can see through walls, which can give you a tactical advantage if you're trying to be stealth or search for weaknesses that have to be targeted and shot in order to take the foe down. She has a connection with the island that will be discovered at a later date in the story. The Struggle is an extra episode that follows the main campaign. It follows Moira during her time away, working with a character whom is seen in the main episodes, but never really focused on at all. The episode is about an hour long and features the strange mechanic of hunting. You kill rabbits, snakes, bugs and spiders to build up your rations, which count for lives. Once you run out of lives, it's game over. I found it interesting and that there were some highlights in the story. The fact that the levels were again reused, which is a theme throughout the entire game, is a bit disappointing. At this stage I feel like they're just flogging a dead horse with the 4th or maybe 5th rehash of a level you've played before as Barry or Claire or as Natasha. It felt rushed and you were pretty much binked around the environment after a wave of enemies. It's pretty disappointing. Little Miss is an extra episode that follows the workings of Natasha. It features a stealth mechanic that requires the player to be hidden from monsters at all time, as it's kind of a dream sequence. It blurs the lines between fiction and reality. Natalia has a ghost self that can more or less astral project, almost an embodiment of her latent powers.
Oh, but I am you. Now, tell me why you're so upset.
Which in this circumstance is entirely separated from her, requiring the player to switch between the characters, one Natalia who's vulnerable and one whom is completely invisible and able to target enemies for the vulnerable Natalia girl. It's a fairly short episode which lasts approximately an hour, and while it's kind of bland, its music, its story, and where it fits into the events of the main campaign are almost intriguing. Without giving too much away, I would say that it's a nice little insight to Natalia.
Dear Natalia, I'm trapped in a tunnel underneath the village. I can't feel my legs. I'm probably dying. Why do you hate me?
The graphics were using the console version of the in-house built MT framework engine. It's good and bad. Good because the frame rate feels fast and responsive, giving the creatures that terrifying quickness, but bad because the lighting feels dated. It's hard to shake the feeling that you're playing on an upscaled version of Revelations, which was released on the 3DS, which, as we know, has limited hardware. It doesn't look like a next-generation experience, from on-screen enemies to skyboxes, all the way down to geometry, which I feel is its biggest problem, and the geometry just makes you feel the throwback to older games. Sound effects and design are alright. The score is pretty satisfying with some darker tunes to get your heart racing, and the howls coming from creatures sound like very annoyed monkeys about to drop down on you. It's tension building for sure. I would recommend that you buy a season pass, as buying an episode will likely frustrate you, as the game doesn't feel complete without them. It's built that way after all. For those of you unaware, a season pass is a fee you pay for most, if not all, of the downloadable content for a title. Overall, the game has finished, and the time is still going into mine within my lounge room, trying to get all the costumes and screen filters, all the random unlockables for the game. Resident Evil 2 Revelation does do a excellent job of continuing the complicated story of Revelations, with Barry shining as one of the most relatable characters in recent memory. I was genuinely rooting for his somewhat lame lines of dialogue. He reminded me of Walter White from Breaking Bad. He's not perfect, but he's on a mission at any cost. Throughout the campaign, specifically with him, there are some touching moments that pull on all the right heartstrings.
Barry, are you okay?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how I used to go for walks like this with Moira and Polly.
Were you a good family?
We tried to be.
While Claire and Moira do have some interesting moments as well, they don't quite stack up.
Oh, and we're gonna find exactly what we need in this shit dump.
From my experience, yes. Help me look.
The voice acting is solid, but It's just not as good as Barry. No doubt there is more to the series and I am looking forward to it, but unfortunately I likely won't be using the Xbox One app to Twitch stream, as it turns out Capcom has censored the end boss fight by making your feed display the pause menu, a frustrating feature for reviewers and broadcasters on the internet. I would recommend getting a capture box and going from there. In the end, convoluted, dark and moody is what you'll get from this title, much like its predecessors. As it is the only Resident Evil game that's even attempting survival horror anymore, I'm happy to keep on playing and checking for new episodes soon. I will be watching. I'm Max Korobax at IdiotBox.
Natalia.